And then Courtney.
Welcome, everyone, to the IAPP web conference, Building the Foundation Records Retention Before AI, sponsored today by Filers Keepers. Participating in today's web conference will automatically provide IAPP certified privacy professionals who are the named registrants with 1 CPE credit. The recording and slides will be available on the IAPP website under the Resources tab within 48 hours. We encourage you to submit any questions you have for the speaker through the Q&A feature, as we will be saving time at the end to address those. With that, I will now hand it over to Vana Pemalar, CEO and co-founder of Filers Keepers, to kick off the program.
All right. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, IAPP, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar. So I'm Vana Pemalar. I'm the co-founder and CEO of filerskeepers and another company called Lawstronaut. And we'll tell you in a minute what that means. With filerskeepers, what we do is we read all the laws in the world, take from their rules that tell companies how long they should store their records and data. And then we help apply those rules to the records and data of our clients by building retention schedules. We have a dashboard where you can say, hey, I'm in these jurisdictions, these industries, please build me a bespoke retention schedule, which we didn't do. We can calculate what's the most optimal retention period given all the countries and states you're in. And it's fully customizable. And when the law changes, we can send you a ping and we can say, hey, the law went from 3 to 5 years. Do you accept or decline? And now that so you're in control of your own schedule. Now that our clients have an up-to-date retention schedule, they come to us and they go, now what? And then we say, well, now you implement that into your systems and records systems. So yeah, that's a big topic for us. So I will go light on the commercials after a few more words. This is our My Schedule feature where you can say, hey, I have like candidate records and I'm keeping those for 2 years, and there are no country deviations. So yeah, if that is of interest to you, then please reach out to us. Before I get into the topic, and I promise you that I'll just spend the first 2 or 3 minutes on advertising ourselves, and then really dive into the substance. Let me talk to you about our other company called Lawstronaut. So with Filers Keepers, we built the world's largest database of records retention obligations, so rules that tell you how long to keep your data and records. That's 358,000 citations, as you could see in the previous slide. But to keep that up to date manually was proven to be a massive task. So what we did is we actually create a crawler where we crawl government websites and we collect laws, regulatory guidance, decisions, court cases, legislative history, and we made that into like a separate company called Lawstronaut. And yeah, we have accumulated over 40 plus million laws in under a year. We're growing really, really rapidly. We have 150 jurisdictions online. If you have, Claude or ChatGPT, and you want to kind of get the legal hallucinations down, then by all means reach out to us because we can give you up-to-date laws. We crawl daily, and we can connect to your Claude, and then you have up-to-date rules in there. I'm using it myself for my own work. We're using it for Filers Keepers. Filers Keepers is the customer of Lawstronaut, and it works amazingly. So just a little bit of yeah, we're at and yeah, why is that? Because yeah, I still believe that legal tech AI struggles with poor data quality. It's incomplete, outdated, and we believe that that should be up to date. So we don't have any patience anymore for out of date data. If the law or the guidance came out yesterday, you want to be able to get a summary today in your AI. So that's what we're trying to solve there, the speed and completeness of data. Yeah, we're at 40 million now, but we'll soon get way more. Yeah, we're here with 40 team members now. And because we're a family-owned business, both for filerskeepers and for Lostronaut, we can keep our cost and therefore your fees down really much. And that's our kind of like one of our also our things that set us apart from the competition. We don't have to, um, it's our philosophy not to charge too much for this stuff. So how does that work? You have a Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini, and you have an AI agent, and it can then call the Low-Astronaut MCP that retrieves a source-grounded answer. You'll know exactly what the Western excavation case in the UK said, and then it will provide you, no hallucinations, just a summary of what the law text says. So yeah, we built an infrastructure that was necessary for filers keepers, yeah, it's not just a crawler. We can parse PDFs at a massive scale and at very low cost. So yeah, please follow Lostronaut and you'll see for yourself. Okay, let's get into it. Um, so you've all been there, right? Um, retention schedule check, um, business validated, and you are set to purge some data, and something in you hesitates. And so why does deletion, kind of like the simplest act of compliance, feel so difficult? It's one of the questions that I ask myself. And yeah, we've built an empire of keeping, but we've never kind of prepared for the emotional, legal, and operational challenge of letting go. And I believe that is only normal because we stem from hunter-gatherers. So it's in our nature to gather resources for our own survival. And it feels so unnatural to let go of things. That's why at least my house can sometimes feel a bit cluttered, and it's hard to let go of things that you like. And we do that in our jobs as well. And what makes deletion so hard? Well, the fear. What if we delete something we need? And you always get punished for something that is gone, and when it goes wrong, you don't get rewarded so much. My job depends on the data, so a lot of people have emotional attachment to the data. What's the privacy professional without their DPIA nowadays, right? Um, and also complexity. We don't know where everything is. We don't know what the rules are. So how, can we do this? It's not just technical. It's an act of trust, basically. And you guys have all probably already bought into the pledge of AI. AI is going to solve all your problems. I think we're getting already a little bit more realistic now that it's almost June to the 2026. We see that the AI agents still make a lot of mistakes, but yeah, everybody believes that this is the new thing, the new will change our lives. It will do everything that we expect. It will, improve our careers and will make us more efficient and make us more money. And at the same time, we also fear that it's, the end of humanity, and we're giving, birth to a whole new form of intelligence. Um, and I think this, also leads to the point that, data in itself has very little value. It's what you do with the data that determines the value, of course. And that's something that we knew already for a long time. Already pre-AI, when the world was still big data and analytics, and that feels like a long time ago nowadays. But it's especially the GDPR that deals with this part, the usage of the data. privacy law at large, and that's why it's such an important legal framework. Um, you know, so if I ask myself if deletion feels so risky, aren't we doing something wrong? There's a security risk in data overload. Um, and inaction doesn't feel very neutral nowadays. We all know that we need a retention schedule. We all know that certain data needs to be kept and certain data needs to go. And there's has been so much enforcement already. I'll get into some of it. But inaction is not neutral. It's almost negligence, I would say, nowadays. The question you should be asking is not like, should we let it go? No, you should let go, but you should ask yourself, while we have it, are we making most of it, basically? And does it aid our processes? And then I think that's a better question. So all was well until the GDPR and now also the AI Act arrived, of course. By the way, there's a little blocking here, but this is actually the Titanic, and our logo is now over the iceberg. That is that bears the EU flag for the GDPR. But one thing is for sure that and I actually virtually attended the last session in Parliament when the GDPR got voted into law. What was it, in 2016? And didn't matter which speaker was speaking or what political party was represented, everybody said the same thing. We want real compliance. And they're not kidding. And we've seen, a lot of enforcement, and it's there to stay. It's not going away. So when it comes to retention, also, the regulator, the legislators want real compliance. And what I find interesting is that, records and information management, RAM, has become mission critical in the age of AI. Because AI and machine learning depends on clean, classified, structured, and governed, and most of all, trustworthy data. And we have the law. It requires us to keep good, governance of the data. But I do believe that AI gives the kind of like business incentive to look again at all the data and incentivize getting rid of rot and to structure everything well. So I find it very funny, sometimes even a bit ironic, that all the cool AI lawyers nowadays have found out that records management wasn't so bad after all. The only problem is a lot of organizations, and this I feel very dearly about this. I'll have another slide later on, have let go of their records managers, or they have all retired and they weren't replaced. And now it's on your desk as a topic, as privacy. And that feels a bit unfair sometimes because it's like, well, it's not all personal data. There's also, a lot of information in there that doesn't touch upon any personal data and has no impact on or a minimal impact on the data subject. So it's definitely something to embrace, I would say. So I would encourage you, become friends with your records management department, because they will know more than you ever. It will be surprising how much they know about data quality, data minimization. They really understand what matters to the business and what doesn't, and they can help with the retention of and defining what the end moment is, what's the end of the life cycle. So, a lot of companies are turning on their Copilot or their Gemini or Claude, and then they're wondering, like, what's happening? Why isn't it producing those amazing results that I thought it would be? Well, you have a lot of different problems, right? There's a lot of rot in your data, redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. Your sensitivity labels are inconsistent. There are lots of duplicates that live everywhere across different platforms, tenants within Microsoft or Google. A lot of orphaned content, content sprawls. But I'm probably, and a lot of old data that should have gone. But also, one of the issues that you can fix tomorrow, and let me give you a little tip, is that when you send a link to a document, Microsoft 365 SharePoint sets the default sharing setting to everyone. And even though you're sending that link to one person, so you feel relatively safe, only Mary received the document, not everyone, because they don't have the link. Well, everyone also includes Copilot. So then through Copilot, people will have access to everything, yeah? Even though you shared the link only with one person. So, you know, there's a lot we can learn from records management and closing the loops. That, if you get your, I believe that if you get your records right, the AI will follow. So AI generates data, right? AI generates a lot of data, and analyzes more data sources than a human can in a short time, creates a lot of extra, and you would even say that, AI needs a lot of data to be able to function well, to be able to train well. Well, yeah, that's true, but usually the AI models that you use have been trained already, and now you just need, input to calculate a proper answer. Plus, the AI needs training on good data, not bad data, because it will just create all kinds of problems in the outcome. So we need to go back to the basics of retention, and then the main question is to keep or delete. Well, on the right side, you have reasons to remember and to keep. You need to keep your data because it represents tremendous value. It's about using the data that generates that value. There are laws that tell you to keep the data. Don't get rid of your warranty data. Don't get rid of your health and safety incidents. And sometimes in litigations, it can mean the difference. Having the data can mean the difference between winning or losing the case. Yeah. You can't prove your position. You may not be able to win. The flip side is also true, of course. If you hold on to a lot of evidence, then that can work against you, it can bite you. And that's the third bullet here on the left-hand side. Laws tell you to get rid of the data, usually data protection laws. And the bigger of the volume of the data, the bigger your breach. And yes, also large amounts of data are perceived as unmanageable, although in an age of AI, I would say, there are two sides to that, of course. Then a lot of people then wonder and come to us and say, well, but how long do I need to store my records? Can I just keep everything 10 years? Because that's the global average. I would say no. So a lot of companies say, well, we have three problems when it comes to retention. The first one is that we don't know the law because there are just so many rules, thousands per country, basically. We don't, and when we do know the law, because it's so many, we don't know what to choose, and laws are even conflicting. And once we have made our choices, how do we then implement that in, various systems and records landscape? Hard copy versus digital, global versus local, cloud on-premise, structured, unstructured, current legacy. Those are all variables that you need to take into account. Each, has its own solution, and each has its own challenges, basically. So it sounds easy, just comply with the law. Unfortunately, the world isn't that great. So if you need to keep something 50 years in Poland or Romania, but then you need to delete it after 7 years in the Netherlands, what are you going to do? Those are hard conflicts. You can't please um, everyone at the same time. And that's why a lot of companies are forced to make choices, especially the multinationals amongst us. And they are faced with systems that don't allow them to do everything they need to do in order to be compliant. They need to comply with conflicting rules and all of that. But not doing anything is not a choice. So you need to go towards some form of like a golden standard, most optimal retention period given all the countries and states you're in, with a few deviations where a country is more strict, either by telling you that you need to keep it maximum shorter than the golden standard, or to keep it longer than minimum longer than the golden standard. Um, and and that's the best practice. And even though you won't end up with a picture perfect solution, because you will still probably have made a judgment call on quite some of those retention obligations. I believe under GDPR and ancillary laws and similar laws elsewhere, a risk-based approach is possible, and this is better than keeping everything forever. It's not just a US in the EU festivity anymore. You know, US states are issuing privacy laws at rapid pace. California CPRA already has a no longer the necessary requirement. It's kind of like it was the first state to introduce that. But now also Colorado, Minnesota, Virginia, maybe even a few other states have that exact same phrasing, no longer than necessary. And then you have a few states that do something very interesting. In Arkansas and Oregon and Utah say when data is no longer required to be retained, which doesn't have the necessity in there. So it's ambiguous how that should be interpreted and if it's different from the other states. But definitely it doesn't say thou shalt keep data forever. So I definitely think there's also a case to be made that you should also keep data there no longer than necessary. But I'm happy to learn what do you think. Um, and then FTC after having spent a lot of time on the European conferences of the IPP, decades I would say, and being wined and dined by everyone and learned and exchanged points of view, they're now actually reading an entire federal privacy law in their Section 5 of the FTC Act. And following that, and it started all with GoodRx and Drizzly and Cafe Press, they started to really enforce data retention. You need to have a schedule. You need to put in there, retention rules, and the little bit of the the regulations that they can cover here, that they can cover the FTC COPPA rule, maybe it's the FTC COPPER, was actually amended to include data retention. So if you are dealing with the data of children, know that ever since April 22nd of this year, you need to inform data subjects of their rights of the retention schedule publicly, and then you need to implement that, of course, because that's what they really care about. A lot of our clients are super hesitant here because they would love to put everything in a public retention schedule. But if you don't have it all in place in your own systems internally, you should also not mislead the public by maybe making false public statements about it. So it's a bit of a chicken and the egg, but for those of you who fall under COPPA, now is the time to act, to be honest. And then, of course, Arkansas follows with their Children and Teens Online Act. And I think I'm gonna skip this one. And there's enforcement everywhere. Yeah. And this is, there was in 2025 kind of like a fair work record keeping blitz in Australia. It had nothing to do with privacy. This was to kind of see if employers were keeping their personnel files at a minimum. And also China, clarifies in their cross-border data transfer rules that retention is very important. And they often want to know, if you bring data outside of China, are you still going to adhere to the Chinese laws regarding retention? And I guess, and I don't have a slide on this, but one of the major regulators in this world is the CNIL in France. They actually have guidance that customer data, consumer data should not be kept longer than 3 years. They take that very seriously. Has a huge impact, of course. And they enforce it almost every single case. So they come in for, a complaint or a data breach, and then they always ask the question, hey, how long are you holding on to these data? And then everybody fails. And every time they have a nice new press release where they say, hey, we found non-compliance with data retention. So regulators are enforcing, whether there are rules or not, doesn't matter. Retention is top of mind. And we are also seeing that more and more regulators are waking up to this point. I'm not going to name names, but there are a few European retention authorities that also use filerskeepers. So the question, of course, is your privacy notice transparent enough? I'll leave you to be the judge of that, but it's maybe good to check that. Do you comply with applicable privacy rules there? And don't just assume that the GDPR is the strictest rule here. If you fall under FTC supervision, please look at all that case law and all those guidance says from them, because I think it's more stringent even than the GDPR. The true challenge of deletion is that it is irreversible. Once it's gone, it's gone. You cannot get it back. If people say, oh, let's soft delete something, that's not deletion. That's archiving. It's a very effective security measure, but you're not out of jail yet from the privacy law. It needs to be auditable. Yeah, so that means that if you delete something, you basically say, I'm going to go through this series of steps. And once I'm done with those steps, there will be kind of like an electronic signature at the end that verifies that I have gone through all the steps. So now I can trust that it's actually gone. The same goes for anonymization. We can probably have a whole webinar about that topic, but I would say, and especially in an age of AI, that it's hard to meet the standards of true anonymization. It does depend on each jurisdiction, and it is in motion with even recent case law in Europe. But it should, in its core, be irreversible. You should not be able to re-identify someone. And of course, it should also be auditable. So when it's gone, it's gone. Soft deletion, pseudonymization, I just mentioned that it is reversible. So we should not, take that as the solution to get out of jail from privacy law. So data deletion is the ultimate sign of trust, guys, really. Basically, if you're telling data subjects that even though I could make a lot of money with this data, I care so much about the relationship that we have with you that we are happy to let go of short-term gains in the interest of compliance and our prolonged relationship. So that's what I think you could tell people who object. You will get a lot of, we've always done it this way, we've always kept their data, why do we need to let go now? And that's true. You have done it always this way, but there wasn't always an AI Act, a GDPR, Data Act, and all those other acts. Or so yeah, that's not a really fair argument. Um, we You want to become deletion ready so that you can actually focus on, having the data ready for your AI solution that is actually meaningful. So you should have deletion readiness. That means that you should know exactly what should go. You know the rules, you know the data. You need to build legal and leadership trust in the process. You need to automate, verify, and audit. You shouldn't just delete. People should sign off on it. And you should definitely normalize deletion as a positive act in your organization. It's nothing scary. It's something we are supposed to do, and it's important. And for that, you need not only just a records management policy or records retention policy and a schedule, you also need a defensible disposition procedure where you can turn a whoopsie into a controlled defensible process. And why would you need destruction? Why would you need such a process? If even though you have a schedule, delete of data that then becomes subject of a discovery, or regulator assumes that you still have that data, then it seems like you inadvertently have deleted something. And that's not the case, of course, if you follow a retention schedule. So you want to kind of make sure that that doesn't happen. So it's not negligent, there's no improper motive, no spoilage of evidence. You're definitely compliant. So you need a policy for that, because without, you need to demonstrate this was not a one-off situation. We actually have a process for this. When something is at the end of the retention schedule, we go through this series of steps to make sure that we, diligently delete whatever is end of life cycle. And that will usually be accepted by a judge. So, make it a conscious situation. It should be rule-based, validated, and conscious. And, it should be approved either by legal, tax compliance. It can also just be the business. Yeah. HR is also perfectly capable of informing you if their data can go. So that's what needs to be in that process. And then you can demonstrate discipline, not chaos. And what makes it defensible is that you follow routine and you perform independent checks and you keep evidence, and it's actually secure and unrecoverable. And it doesn't matter what it is. It's a system, it's paper, it's backup, doesn't matter. This is how you deal with it. Yeah. Indiscriminately. So once you have your defensible disposal procedure, your schedule, you need to start thinking about how to implement that retention schedule into your systems. And there we believe that you should start with the exceptions first, legal holds. Because the legal hold tells you, in view of a litigation or potential litigation, that you need to hold on to certain records for discovery. And that kind of like conflicts with the whole purpose of deletion, because you want to get rid of it. So before you hit the purge button, please check if there are any legal holds on the data before you press purge. So then the question is, are you in control there? Do you have a legal hold tool? Do you know all the different legal holds that are out there in your organization? Do you know the custodians? Have you lifted any legacy holds because they usually sit there forever? Um, and how do they kind of like, what's the scope? And this is where I want to challenge some of the Americans here in the audience today. If you get a litigation hold for the US, that doesn't mean you need to keep your records in Fiji per se. Yeah. Unless there's a specific reason to keep the Fijian records as well. So challenge yourself and each other as well. Like, what is the true international, scope? And of course, still remember as a lawyer having to, navigate GDPR versus a US issued legal hold. So that's sort of complex in itself already. So let's work together and define that scope. So once you got your procedures, your schedule, you're aware of your legal holds, you know what you can't delete, then where should you start? And what we see our clients do is, even though the unstructured systems are probably the highest risk, like your Office suite, right? Microsoft, Google. Most of our clients nowadays start with one of their big structured systems. So either their HRM or HRIS, their ERP system or their CRM system, just so that they can do a pilot and that they can show their leadership it can be done, um, without having to fix everything at the same time. Because don't promise your leadership that you will solve all their problems, because you're gonna set yourself up for failure. So start with a pilot. And that is a sprint of a few weeks, maybe a few months tops. And it helps you to understand, does my, defensible disposal procedure work? Am I getting all these sign-offs that I need? Everything. And then, because when you hover with your finger above the purge button, your business is going to get very nervous, likely. Um, and then they'll be like, I want to check, I want to validate, which is perfectly fine, of course. But you'll see that it takes a bit of time to get used to this whole project. So it's a very good moment to just stress test that. And it's better with a structured system because you can use the functionality of that system to get rid of the data, or at least it's a bit more targeted. And yeah, what do you do when you've completed your pilot? We would say, well, either you tackle your top 10 systems, so you go from your HRM to your ERP to your CRM, etc., or and then you tackle the biggest risk, basically, um, or you go for HR, for example, or the business function that you focused on. So if you started with your HRM system, you got momentum in HR, so let's fix all of HR now and use that momentum. So yeah, that's another thing that we see our clients do. This is, I can skip this about how you prioritize it. I think it's pretty obvious. It kind of follows the DPIA kind of situation. And when you are mapping, against a structured system, you want to actually create what we call an executable policy for data purge. Yeah. So you want to map the retention schedule to for now, I call them the purgeable data types. It's a workday term. I think in other systems they could be called info types or destruction objects, or something else, but they are groupings of data fields that you can actually get rid of. So what you need to do is you need to determine, like, how does my schedule map to those purgeable data types? How often am I going to execute? What kind of filters am I going to apply? And how does this work? Now, once you do that, you'll notice that there will be three issues that you will run into. The first one is scope differences between the schedule and the system. Yeah. System says there's a difference between regular leave and sick leave. Workday says, sorry, can't do. We group those and we call it absence. But those rules might be different in a given country. So what are you going to do? Data dependency. SAP is notorious for this. We want to delete A, but we cannot delete A without also deleting A and B. But A and B have different retention periods under the law. What are you going to do? There might be limited triggers available, right, within the system. The law says end of fiscal year, and then the system says, sorry, I can only do termination dates for terminees, for leavers, or I can do date of last modification or creation or something. So those are all three things that you need to do. So you need to map, you need to navigate and make choices. Those choices, in my opinion, although they are very operational, they're still legal choices. It's usually where, your average like Workday expert or SAP expert will be like, I know how to delete data, but if you ask me this question, I'll just bounce it back to you, privacy or legal. Um, so this is something where you still need to look into as a lawyer. We do a lot of these projects, by the way, but it's something that legal or privacy needs to be involved in. Um, yeah, what are all the steps? I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip a few things. But the idea is that you actually start understanding, how you use the structured system and how you then put those map those, and then you need to basically map and validate. The idea is that you go from the law to a retention schedule to a executable policy. Yeah, so those are kind of like the three layers that you need to navigate through. And those two translations are to legal driven projects basically. What you want to do is you want to you know create filters, and those filters you see here, and then it's like, okay, for purge plan HR1, we look at the purgeable data type compensation, description is this, and then it maps to HR1 in our schedule that says 15 years, except for Bulgaria, Chile, and Vietnam, because those have other different retention periods, and those will pop up later down below where we will describe what to do with Bulgaria, Chile, and Vietnam. And those are filters that can then be built into Workday. Not every single structured system allows for a connector, where you could say, oh, I'll just glue filerskeepers to the system. Although we are working now with a third party to get our schedules into Workday directly. They're very confident it can be done. It's not really the vision of some of the SaaS vendors. They say like we don't want a direct connector to like purge capabilities. And then the question is how bad is that because it doesn't need to be that bad. Because you're running this probably once a year. So then at the end of the year you can just update the mapping again, create new filters, and hand them over again. But it's still quite manual. And then eventually you will end up with like a residual risk matrix where you can kind of say, okay, well, we found a few risks that we weren't able to mitigate, and then we basically write it down, get sign off from leadership. So when we talk about this, so that's structured systems. Now the bigger risk can be unstructured systems. And you have two problems when it comes to unstructured. First of all, I believe that Microsoft and Google with unstructured data because there's a lot of unknowns in there and what you could call dark data or hidden data um, is probably a higher risk than any structured system can pose. But it's also harder to solve. So you have a legacy problem there. We made a mess of our SharePoints and team sites, but you also have at the same time a future-facing problem. Because even though if I fix the mess, how am I making sure that we don't end up in the same mess in a few years again? So that's something to really, really focus on. So it's not just I'm going to press a few buttons in Purview, which you definitely should do. But it's also like how I'm going to facilitate my business with certain, SharePoints, um, architecture, so to say, that we are actually facilitating compliance. So, um, a lot of people ask me, can you use Purview for this? Microsoft has Purview, Google has Vault. Yes, definitely, you can leverage those tools, and they can be pretty good. But it is not a magic cure to everything. You need to really spend the time organizing and building the labels and creating policies and attaching them and letting the system learn and discover the data. And you should also be aware that um, systems like Purview are limited to the Microsoft Office suite. You can't use that, for any like shared drives or legacy Microsoft setups or even other systems. So you're still kind of constrained there. But definitely those tools can help, and you can also combine it with data discovery tools as well. So a lot of people ask me, can e-discoveries and scanning software be used to find electronic records eligible for disposition? Yes, of course it can. But there is also a big but, and that's that, if we look at the current data discovery market, and I believe there are like 150 to 200 serious data discovery companies out there. A lot of people know some of the big players, but I think there are quite some. But I only feel that there are a few that are really doing a really good job, because a lot of the vendors have a typical cybersecurity use case in mind when they offer data discovery. So they want to find data elements of high risk and they want to set confidentiality levels. And a lot of those suppliers are like one-trick ponies, and they don't have much expertise on records management and compliance. And there's no way to map, their retention schedule to collect data classification in their tool. So there are definitely a few really, really good solutions out there. Um, and, I believe that in the right way, you don't just take a data and, what kind of, is there a name or a social security number in there, but you also take into account the records perspective. And you search for context and, and data lineage, and you actually ingest a retention schedule, and you can build end-to-end classifications which work. So you can find the data, classify it, and then relate it back to the schedule. And ideally, you can also then hit the trigger, not just give the report on what needs to go, but you can also initiate a purge, workflows, validations, everything. So that's what ideally you would need to look into, when getting a data discovery tool. We're very optimistic company, and we're definitely we have a vision on where this needs to go. We need to actually create a knowledge graph in the future, where let me see where I have that, where we can kind of bring everything together, where you can actually say, hey, this is this record document related to this contract was an invoice. The CEO emailed the CFO about it. It's part of that legal hold under this policy. It was last edited by this person, and it was subject to that email, so that you can have a huge, a really, really rich overview of your content. And that goes through ontology, and that goes through provenance. I don't have time. I'll come back to talk about those concepts. I don't have enough time to talk about it today. But the idea is that with provenance, the story and the origin story of the information. Who created this information under what authority? Why was it created? When and where? Who held it? So you want to understand the biography of the information, and you want to make sure that the integrity of the information is preserved and the authenticity. In the age of AI, I think that's super important. And then ontology is not just a metadata schema, but it really tells the machine what everything is. So it tells you exactly what projects were run, which business functions were there, what did the company decide at a given moment. And it gives a full history of the company and all its business processes. And if you have that and you have provenance information around the story of the record, then your AI will be amazing. And that's where I feel that our industry should go towards. And I mean the records management, information governance, and data discovery, data governance industry. So a lot to be said. I'll be back to talk about these concepts in more depth. Maybe something fun to do in the last few minutes before we take some questions is how long do you need to keep, some your chats and your training documents? Because after all, I said, like, let's do records retention properly. So a lot of questions, and to get ready for AI, and a lot of people come back to me and go like, okay, well, I got AI, I'm using it, how long should I keep things? And I'm not going to give you a really straightforward answer. I'm sorry. I'll give you bandwidths of what I see nowadays. It's not yet settled, I'm afraid. But this is not where the AI Act applies. Yeah, where the AI Act applies, you need to follow the AI Act. Very simple. There are like 25 different retention obligations under the AI Act. But this is where you just, use some chat. And I believe that if it's light touch, if, it's a general working chat. Yeah, brainstorming drafts, everything. I think you should keep it somewhere between 3 months and 36 months. 3 months are organizations that say, well, this is not really part of our work. It's an aid, but you don't store it. Chat is not a system of record. Whereas the 36-month kind of companies say, well, we run complex and long-lasting projects. People can go on a year sabbatical and return back to the project. We need to do some evaluations post-project. So we're going to keep everything 36 months. Yeah. So that's what we see on average. We see longer, we see shorter, but this is kind of the average. And then, for more official kind of like work, then we see somewhere between 2 and 10 years. Yeah. Depending on if it's more of it just follows how long you keep projects and contracts and all of that. And then a lot of people forget that the chat and can also constitute regulated communications in finance, pharma, legal, whatever. And there, the sector mandated rules are usually globally around 5 to 10 years. So you need to keep this as part of that also. Yeah. So I think that's important to realize. If you are a financial institution or pharma, different rules may apply, kind of depending on what the purpose was for the chat. So yeah. And then of course you can think about, how long are you going to keep your training records, depending on who was trained. I think it's just part of, how you train your people anyhow. What kind of like policies do you have? And then also your training corpora. You need to follow the content basically. Yeah. So that's something that I see. I do want to see if there are still some questions from people. Let's have a look. Well, I don't see that many. Um, feel free to still type. I think at least I'm looking in the chat, guys. I'm not sure if that's what I'm supposed to do. Um, oh, here's Q&A. Sorry. Um, Someone is asking for Lostron, can we connect it to Harvey AI? I'm definitely happy to explore anything. So feel free to reach out to us, and then let's see. The MCP is universal, so we can definitely do that. Then how and how often are you privacy professional using AI in their day to day? I really don't know, guys. I know that my whole company uses AI, and I'll be very candid there. There's AI in our processes. We can't read all the laws in the world without AI help, but I'm very happy to say that we didn't fire anyone. We still have our 40 lawyers on staff reading everything. So we just speed up basically and we can provide a better product. But as long as AI is built to preserve energy, I think we are all still in a job because AI will limit itself and cut corners and summarize things and so there's still hope there, I would say. Someone is asking, what is the right mechanism or flow to decide how long data should be retained and how to communicate to higher management? Okay, so first of all, you need to know the law before you can decide. Yeah. And then when you look at the law, don't ever just pick the longest because you need to understand what the nature of the rules are. Are those minimums? Are those maximums? What's the delta? Are those statutory limitations? Do we really need to keep the data, or is it just good practice in view of a potential litigation? So those are the choices you need to make, and then it's a risk-based decision, basically. I honestly believe that there aren't, well, there's definitely right and wrong. It's sometimes black and white, but there's a lot of gray shades as well, and you just need to decide, basically. This is all baked into filerskeepers, by the way. So we do this for you. You just have to tell us which industries you're in and which countries. And how to communicate it to a higher management is, well, very simple. We can't keep everything forever. And we can also not delete everything immediately. So we need to find the right balance. Otherwise, we're non-compliant. And that's a huge risk for us. So we'll never be GDPR or privacy compliant or generally compliant with any rules if we don't have a proper retention schedule. Yeah. So I think that's the way to do that. Are there AI models currently trained to be records management agents and do records retention work? Nice, nice. Yeah, I've had a few sleepless nights, but I'm glad to say that we're also working on our filerskeepers MCP. So if you guys are interested, then we can work with that. No, it's actually the big AI companies coming to us now because they don't have the right data, so they're looking to license it from us. So yeah, that's I think where we stand. So again, as long as AI is built to preserve energy, you can't give it a task, hey, read all the laws in this one country. It will start cutting corners and you will get a lot of issues. Yeah. So that's it. Is there any data category that can be retained forever? Yeah, definitely. But it really depends on what kind of data and what kind of country we're talking about. But for example, in Peru, you need to keep your administration for the life of the company plus 5 years. So I would consider that pretty much forever. Nothing is forever, guys. Yeah. So if the company doesn't exist anymore, it will end at one point. But yeah, definitely, there's a lot of those. Yeah, I think the, definitely thousands of rules globally. Yeah. Um, an e-commerce corporate operates in France, holds data on EU and non-EU citizens. France says keep for 3 years. Other states have longer retention periods. What to do? Is France the most strict? Yeah, definitely France is the most strict. And this will be my last question, by the way. Um, and But France doesn't necessarily need to rule the world. Yeah. So you can definitely say we're going to keep everything 5 years, but then make an exception for France and say France will be 3 years. But it doesn't mean that in your whole group you need to keep everything for 3 years now. Yeah, I think we're at time, Courtney. I tried my best. Just one more came in, but yeah.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much to Vaughn for sharing these valuable insights with us, and a big thank you to Filers Keepers for sponsoring today's program so that it's free for our audience. A reminder that the recording and slides of today's program will be made available on the IAPP website under the Resources tab within 48 hours. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you in another IAPP webinar soon.